But I do have to say that there was a part of me that by like just not having anything, it was such an amazing source of freedom. I think that, and as I get older, my belief in religion is that I believe in all religions.
Bushra Rehman is a poet, novelist, and cultural activist. She is the daughter of Pakistani immigrants, and her novel Corona is a dark comedy about being South Asian American, queer, and Muslim in Queens, New York. Rehman is co-editor of an absolutely fabulous anthology that's being reissued called Colonize This! Exclamation point. Young Women of Color on Today's Feminism. Her first book of poetry, which is what we have out in the back, is Mariana's Beauty Salon, and it came out last year. And because writing novels, poetry, and editing is not enough, she's now doing a young adult fiction called Corona Stories of a Queen's Girlhood, which will soon be published. Her writing merges her life experience and her political activism. Her work feels deeply personal, but also universal. It breaks open stereotypes. It asks us to see one another in a new way. And I think, again, at this moment in time, that's just such vital work. So thank you, Bushra.
So I thought I would start with some love poems because let's just ease into it, slow and easy. Although, as we know, love is not slow and easy. And for those of you like me who weathered many a heartbreak, you'll realize that a lot of my love poems are actually heartbreak poems. And it's because when I'm actually in love, I'm too busy being in love to write. And then it's when I'm out of love that I'm just like going to Rumi and Neruda and getting inspiration and just like writing my heart out. Oh, okay, you don't need that. I don't really need it. It's okay. That's the notes that I will no longer use. All right. So this first poem is called "At the Museum of Natural History." Have any of you been there? The Dinosaur Museum. So it's a place that one of my exes invited me once, and we were in a complicated like. Let me put this down here. We were in like a very complicated relationship for many, many years, and we were friends, and so it was hard to break up. And anytime we break up, we'd start hanging out again, and it lasted for too long. And at this point, he asked me to go to the museum with him, and I was like, "That's cool. There's security there. They'll stop any kind of crazy fights that happen." And it's also inspired by a Rumi line called "Love is a tyrannous prince." Is the sound okay? Yeah. Um, as we both look up at the Tyrannosaurus rex, its bones painted black, its danger extinct, I can hear the sound of children echo throughout the museum. And we're not afraid this way to stand a few inches away from each other. We're not afraid because it's over. The Tyrannosaurus rex doesn't scare us, and we don't scare each other. It's over. The bones are beginning to fade and bleach in our failure. But if one day someone finds our bones and decides to lay them right next to each other, will they lay them in their proper ways? Will they mix up my hip with yours? Will they place the fingers of my hands on someone else's palms? Will they ever know that this flesh answered to the other? That my fingers traveled all over the empty space around your bones? So that was that. Heartache, I highly recommend writing during heartache, and I highly recommend reading Rumi, the Arbery translations specifically, and just pulling lines. That's what I used to do, is just like pull random lines of Rumi and then just write. So that last one was from Love is a Tyrannous Prince, Rumi line. And here's another Rumi line that was the other poem written by this person. So basically it was like I guess now they say non-binary. It was like we were two bi people in an open relationship in New York City in the 90s. It was just like too much. But this one is called Your Lock is More Delightful to Me Than 100 Keys. And it's the ones for the real toxic relationships that you're like, can't get out of. It's the missing clasp of your body that shudders me awake. And before I fall asleep, I replay all the tightly wound metal of our kisses, all the ways our bodies resisted, all the ways we came unhinged. Let 1,000 doors fall from their places, 1,000 bees fly from their nests. That one. And then let's see. But I do think that all that heartache, if you learn from it, you can eventually get to a place where you're like, aha, I see that red flag. It's a giant freaking red flag. Let me just stay away from that. And and I've now been with my partner for like over 10 years. We have a kid. We've been through so much. And I think that there's a way that someone told me that we should do, like me and this other friend should do a panel on how to have like long relationships when you're like in community and, activists and all that stuff. And I feel like one of the things I would say on the panel is that a long relationship, you have to think of it as a phoenix dying and being reborn again and again. The key is to know whether it's a phoenix or a zombie pigeon. Then you don't know. But like, I do think that there is a way that I do find that that's what happens for us. And this poem was written some time ago. And it's, and I think that, money is often like one of the things that couples fight about the most. And we were both two working artists, don't come from trust funds, like, and often we wouldn't have money and not even know how we were going to pay the rent. And so at this point, our car broke down and we didn't even like, I don't even think we had renewed our AAA or whatever. And so we just like left it on the side of the road and just walked home. And so this is called, and we've come such a long way. I sent it to him this morning, being like, honey, we've come a long way. But it's called The Car. As the car slows down to the stop, the darkness swells around us. We are on the edge. All is quiet. It's been a month of everything falling apart. We make our way home in the pitch black dark. Do not talk. I draw myself a bath. Think of my parents, how little money they had, how little money we have now. One day this era will be called a depression, but tonight we beat ourselves against the walls for being so broke, for the car we must leave on the side of the road. Easy enough to forget we are being sucked dry by vultures. Easy enough to forget there is a war. But quiet now. Lay down beside him. Forget. Turn on the 70s soul. Love him on the bed, still in your towel. Let it all ease out. Forget there is not enough money to pay the rent in the house. So thank you. And I'm not saying that like money leads to happiness, because look at Donald Trump. I mean, he's like such a great example about how like you could have so much money and be like maybe one of the unhappiest people around. But I do think, and people have proven, that there is a certain level of money that we need to have to live a certain quality of life to not break down. And I think about, how I grew up. I grew up in Corona, which is a very under-resourced neighborhood in Queens. Immigrant neighborhood in Queens, and the kind of fighting and tension and violence that would happen amongst people of color, I feel like was so much a part of just how much we were all struggling. And I think that it's the same with the backlash that's happening in this country right now. Like, people are struggling, and when you struggle financially, you look for scapegoats, you get angry, you get tired, you're exhausted, and that leads to just all kinds of horror. So I don't know where I'm going with that. I'll just read a poem. But so this poem is called Rapunzel's Mother, or a Pakistani Woman Newly Arrived in America. And you all know the story of Rapunzel, yes? I think they call it Tangled now for your generation. But the thing with that story, if you read one of the original Grimm fairy tales, the reason that she's in that tower is that her mother was pregnant and was hungry, and they lived next to a witch. The witch grew like great vegetables because she was a witch and she had magical powers. And so the wife was like, "I'm so hungry, I want some of those witch's vegetables." And her husband went and got it, and that's how they ended up, like, he got caught, and so she had to give up their firstborn child. Like, that's the backstory of why she's in that tower in the first place. And I often think of that as a metaphor for growing up with immigrant parents, because the way my parents grew up, like food, there was definitely food scarcity, and they struggled. And when she first came here, there would be all these pictures of her like in the grocery store, like posing next to like the aisles of food, and sending it, like just being like, wow, this is amazing. And I found this one picture of her with me pregnant, and I wrote this poem about it called Rapunzel's Mother, a Pakistani Woman Newly Arrived in America. With a cabbage, a box of eggs so clean, she could easily forget the source of their existence. My mother filled her silver cart and moved in line to make her purchase. The cashier turned a sharp glance at the small brown woman with the pierced nose and covered head. She didn't fit into this, an American supermarket. "And what?" asked the cashier. "Are you willing to pay for this?" She held a head of lettuce in the air. It reflected off her rhinestone glasses and the hairspray in her hair. "But this," said my mother, "is America. I thought there was no barter here." "Said the cashier. "There's give and take all over the world. What made you think it would be different here?" She shook her head in her plastic hair. But I have money. My mother tried to act like she didn't care. Her English broke all over her and fell apart in the air, but the cashier cackled, "No, no, no, my dear. What I want is here." And she pointed a nail, silver painted and crooked, at my young mother's stomach, which I had just begun to share. "That's the price you'll have to pay, my dear, for this fresh lettuce. Each egg that erupts into a new blown head shall be the property of this here supermarket, country, and nation. And don't even think of running, because we've got the goods on you. Along with every other immigrant, we've got your passport, your foreign passport right here." She made to reach into her too tight jeans, but my mother, she ran out of there. The shopping girl openly laughed behind her, and the lines and lines of customers just stood there with their stupid grins. My mother ran. The door opened by itself. My mother ran, but she still found herself in a foreign land, far away from home. And I thank you. And I think about that because, as children, we turned out to be quite different than what our parents wanted. Not all of us. There's six of us, and they did well with four of them. And two of us are black sheep, and we hang out together all the time, me and my other sister. But I do think that that was a trade-off that they didn't expect, and I don't think they even knew what to expect. But I went many years without talking to my family. I was like a runaway. It turned out later, I ran away from home when I was like 20, and I ran to San Francisco, and I was homeless, and I found out later from one of my friends who's a youth worker there that I was a homeless youth, and I was like, but I was 20, I was like all adult. She's like, no, you're technically a youth when you were 20. But so I think, but with my family now, we talk, we hang, there's been healing. That's what I think is so amazing about getting older, is this way you can circle back to your families after troubled years, as you all get older and more compassionate and basically too tired to fight. And recently I hung out with my mom, and she just had surgery, so I've been spending a lot of time with her. And I said, what was it like for you when you moved to, we grew up we spent most of our time in Queens, and then they moved to New Jersey when I was 16. And I said, what did you feel like when you moved here? And she was like, I felt bored and afraid. And so I was like, that's such a great way to explain like an immigrant experience. Like I was bored because of all the social activities you're missing from back home, and I was afraid. And I think that one of the ways that she compensated was just by watching Bollywood movies all the time. Does anyone here watch Bollywood movies at all? She would like, one thing she would do is she would like actually tape the movies to make illegal bootlegs for my uncle's store that he would then sell in his store. But so the movies would be playing like nonstop in our house, and this is VCR days, so you couldn't digitally, like you had to basically play the movie from beginning to end to make the copy. And then she had to give him the videos. So what she would do is put a tape recorder. There's like a whole copyright free zone in my house. Like she would put a tape recorder next to the TV and tape the songs that she liked. But if any of you have ever taped, you know that it can catch the background noise and everything else. So I actually found one of those tapes and I played it, and I listened to us as children in the background, which was really eerie. And my mom was, she really suffered in many ways, and she really kind of, I have a more compassion for it now, but she really took it out on the children. I mean, there were six of us, and it was just her, and it was just like a one-bedroom apartment. I mean, just like craziness, right? So it was intense to listen to these tapes. And this poem is called Ammi's Cassettes, and Ammi is what we call mother. Um, the other day, I found my mother's cassettes from the 80s. They were full of love songs from Indian movies. Ammi used to tape them from the TV while she cleaned. And I thought back to the orange carpets, because we all used to have orange carpets, the sofas with their plastic, the way everything was dusted and perfect. I tried to fill the memory with her music, to come up with something peaceful, something splendid. But the tapes, they just didn't play that way. You see, they caught all the background noise, the sound of babies crying, children fighting, fire engines going, and then the sound of a child being hit. The children wouldn't stop making noise until my mother's own voice would break. Then there would be nothing but the sound of her crying and the sound of music in a language my mother was dying to hear. And I thought back to the orange carpets and the way I would press my face against them and against the plastic sofas until the perspiration would make it stick, and listen to the sound of her crying and all the love songs of longing. They promised everything missing in that house with its orange carpets, everything missing in the plastic, everything she ever recorded. So, thank you. I guess I get the recording gene from my mom then. She was a documenter in her own way. I'll read one more poem, and then if there's time, maybe I'll read a last one. And then I'm excited to hear your questions and have a conversation. So this poem is called Masjid, and I woke up this morning and the news alert was that all houses of worship needed to be on high alert, and it was just so upsetting. There was a second shooting at a synagogue. There's been shootings at temples, at churches, at gay nightclubs, which I consider holy places. I think that there was a way that this high alert is so horrible. And when I grew up, yes, there was tension, but there was also a religious tolerance, which for Queens, I mean, like literally, you had like so many religions and so many people living next to each other, peacefully most of the time. And my father actually, and he didn't even realize this, he was part of creating the first masjid or mosque, like a Muslim house of worship in New York City in the 70s and 80s. And he didn't even know that he was making that. He just knew he needed a place to pray. And so him and his friends, all working class Pakistanis, like slowly raised the money. And over 20 years, they built this masjid. And the thing that makes it historically significant is that it's one of the first buildings made to look like a mosque. So it has like a minar, that tower, and it has a dome. Like any place could be a masjid. Like this room could become a masjid if we just pray in it. Like any place can be a holy place. But this was the first place in New York City that was made architecturally to look like a masjid. And it's called Masjid al-Falah, and it exists in Corona, Queens. Um, Masjid. Let me see if I can do this one off book. Let's try. The minar and dome of our masjid took longer to grow than trees. Our fathers bought the land, then tilled it. Before that, it was a parking lot for our neighbors, the Jehovah's Witness, who sold it to us when the door-to-door wasn't bringing in enough donations. Our fathers sowed the seeds then, Qurans and Janamazes. And in all my years, from when I was 4 to 16, the walls went up, and then the dome grew at the same pace my breasts did. The minar, too, grew to reach the queen's sky, push up past the telephone lines, let itself poke up, respectful still of the Episcopalian church steeple next to it, and the flat brick surface of the kingdom of the Jehovah's Witness. It was fine real estate for religion on National Street, a church, a kingdom, and a masjid, crammed next to each other, wall to wall and skin to skin. And if you crossed the street, there was a Catholic store selling crucifixes and paintings of women and men in hell burning. The sinners looked like all of us, but I always thought that all of us in our agony looked like Jesus. Okay, do I have time for one more? Do one more? Okay. So let's see where this poem is. I just thought I'd read it because like whenever I come to college, I'm just like, oh, everyone has their book bags. And when I ran away from home, I just had my book bag. And I had a few other things, but they all got stolen on the Greyhound. And then this last book bag got stolen at some point, and it was like a very intense for me because it was really the last kind of reminder. But I do have to say, not that I'm encouraging people to run away from home, but I do have to say that there was a part of me that like just not having anything, it was such an amazing source of freedom. I think that, and as I get older, my belief in religion is that I believe in all religions, and thus believe in none, but then believe in all of them at the same time. But I think what I moving towards more and more in my life is a way of just having nothing and just trying to be more zen and meditate and things like that. So I feel like I was already reaching that when I had absolutely no personal possessions at all at this point in my life. Book bag stolen March 14th. Some people say it's dumb to get attached to things, but sometimes you really can't help it. When you've got a thing and it's got all, when you've got a thing and it's so many times it's been the only thing you've got, when you can turn to it and say, it's just you and me, kid, and then laugh a lot. You're never really alone when you've got a thing you can carry around, when the thing itself carries your toothbrush, your socks, because you never know where you're going to end up. I mean, what are you supposed to do? How can you not get attached when it's the only thing that's taught you the lesson of what was essential and what was not? You say, I don't need anyone now. I've got my things. You don't know how or where I'm going, and you can't come along, but my book bag can. I mean, what are you supposed to do? How can you not get attached? When there's always a diary handy, condoms, pencils, and pens, scraps of addresses of people to whom you never give a thought. Of course, you're always pulling the scraps up every time you're trying to get change for cigarettes or the bus or the toll-free number of your advisor in New York. But mostly change, the condoms just dust and rot. I mean, maybe my book bag heard me the day I was in David's garden and said, I'm going to stop moving around. I don't care about having adventures anymore. I just want a home and a garden, and I'm so tired I don't even care if it sounds like a magazine. I said no more traveling, and I know my book bag heard me. Why else would it have disappeared? Somehow, though, it's been happening lately. My jeans wore out, my boots hurt when I walk, and I called long distance yesterday to mourn the loss. All of us old friends separate and falling off, with antidepressants and Valium and marriage. It is such a sin to be lonely, one friend asked. It is, I said, it is. I called them all. You know how it is. Some people say it's dumb to get attached to things. But you know sometimes you really can't help it when you've got a thing, and so many times it's been the only thing you've got. So I'll stop there. And so excited to hear the next reader, who we're having a reunion after almost 20 years, right? Something like that?
Yeah. With great pleasure that I introduce our second reader, Ruth. No, damn. I tried really hard. Ruth Sanabria. Her first collection of poems was called The Strange House Testifies and won second place in the 2010 annual Latino Book Awards. Her second collection, Beasts Behave in Foreign Land, received the 2014 Letras Latinas Red Hen Press Award. Her poems have appeared in journals such as Women Writing Resistance and U.S. Latino Literature Today. Most recently, her essays, poems, and short stories have been published in translation in her home country of Argentina. She has read her poetry in libraries, prisons, schools, parks, bars, and universities across the U.S., Argentina, Mexico, and Peru, and now Brookdale. Sanabria's poems explore themes of human rights and injustice, children as witness to state terror, and the role of art in resistance. Her commitment to these themes stems from her own personal experience, which I'll let her share with you. But the poems are powerful and haunting, but against this backdrop, they also tell stories of love, of getting high and getting tattoos, and I think really touch on, the common humanity that we all share. So it is with great pleasure that I introduce Ruth.
I'm gonna begin. So ghost fishing, eco poetry. So a lot of my writing does kind of speak to like what I care about and activism. And I don't want to talk too much because I ramble. I'm not as like good. Like I was talking about it with the students today. Like I need to stay on like script, and I need to I can't ramble. I can't do this to myself. So I'm gonna put a timer on, and we're gonna do this. So I'm gonna start actually not by reading my poetry, but by reading poems of two writers that really influenced my work. And I like to do this. I like it when poets do this at poetry readings because I feel like I don't just, it's not like my work emerges out of like my own genius. Like I really am just part of a history of writers in the United States and in the Americas, so in the world. So I like to bring who influenced me, who still speaks through to me in my writing. And so I'm going to start with Focus in Real Time by June Jordan. A bowl of rice, as food, as politics or metaphor, as something valuable and good, or something common to consume, exploit, ignore. Who grew these grains? Who owned the land? Who harvested the crop? Who converted these soft particles to money? Who kept the cash? Who shipped the consequences of the cash? Who else was going to eat the rice? Who else was going to convert the rice to cash? Who would design the flowers for the outside of the bowl? Who would hold the bowl between her hands? Who would give the bowl away? Who could share the rice? Who could fill that bowl with rice? How many times a day? How many times a week? Who would adore the hands that held the bowl that held the rice? Who would adore the look, the smell, the steam of boiled rice in a bowl? Who will analyze the cash the rice becomes? Who will sit beside the bowl or fight for rice? Who will write about the hands that hold the bowl? Who will want to own the land? A bowl of rice. Love her. So I'm gonna ask, don't clap because it freaks me out. I'm already like jittery, and so I don't expect that. Don't just. So I want to start with. I was born in Argentina, and my parents were activists. My mom had me when she was 19. My dad was 20, and both my parents were kidnapped during a military dictatorship, and I was kidnapped as well. My mother and my father were disappeared, meaning we didn't know where they were for close to half a year. They were in concentration death camps. Very few people survived. In fact, all evidence of the concentration camp in which my mom was kept there was none. And because the majority of the people that were there were killed, when my mother survived, all she carried with her was her memory. And she had this really big nose that she hated when she was growing up. But when they blindfolded her, she was like able to see through the blindfold. And as they were escorting her from torture room to torture room, or having her maybe participate in the delivery of a baby that was born in captivity, she was able to memorize kind of like the details of where she was walking and turning. And that memory that she brought to, when we came to this country as refugees, as exiles, became like the seeds for a collection of short stories called The Little School. And I bring this to the table today because part of her memory, she had to label it fiction, although it was memoir. And she had a really hard time finding a market for it because they were like, this is young adult because the writer is 19, the voice is 19. And it's interesting, we were talking about condescension of youth, like the complexity. There's no market for that. Young adults don't want to hear this. There is no market for that. So she had to find publication, like a house in London that would publish this work. And so it's interesting if you ever get rejected to continue sending your work out. Just because someone says there is no market, that book continues to be published, and it's still really relevant. But I find interesting how truth, memory, and fiction all become this one narrative. Her poems later on, her short stories later on become evidence in trials for truth and justice, because it is the only evidence that this concentration camp existed was her memory. And when she drew out the layout of what she thought it was, turns out they found plans deep in the archives of this house that had once existed on this land that they destroyed. And it was exactly the layout that my mom was able to recreate. So last week, the 129th granddaughter, they call them hijos de desaparecidos, nietos de desaparecidos, grandchildren of the disappeared, children that were born in captivity. Their parents, mothers mostly, always were killed, but the children were put up for adoption. I was very fortunate to be found by my grandmother before, there was like a 24-hour gap, and she found me within that 24 hours. She got me back, but not everybody was, because they had me already with someone else, ready to live another life. So my mother participated in a delivery in the concentration camp, and I'm going to shut up, but I'm going to read a poem right now. They just found the 129th granddaughter that they've been searching for over 20 years. And so I wanted to read a poem in honor of her. It was a great honor to testify against the people who had participated in our kidnapping several years ago, and I wrote this poem called Ars Poetica in response to that experience. It was surreal because I testified via Skype, and it was just seeing their faces was unbelievable. Ars Poetica. Story takes her skin, story takes her bones. She finds her toes and her fingertips. When she speaks like salmon running, the dead and the living converge. The river of memory rocks the hunger of claws and tongues. Electricity swallows itself back through its double-prod picana. Bullets dislodge themselves from their chore of destroying the same day over and over again. And from the caverns of fear and revision, skin resurrects the skin. Each sentence closes in like the crawl of split skin, sealing its red, wet avulsion. The enormity of the pending night scares the 7 assassins on trial. They understand that in hell they will eat their own throats. Portrait of a Father by Blanca 77. Hair on chin, on fingers, on chest, on legs, on wrists, on arms, on which I rest. Smile that opens to eat 10 toes or blow umbilical horns and laugh. Chenu man of helping hands, diaper, food, and milk. Smell of soap, of sweat, of books, of mate, wine, and cigarettes. Sweet night song in deep, sad voice. Duerme, duerme, negrita. Arms to be hushed and held in. 8 brick doors with boots and guns, so shelves and drawers and tables on floor, steel books and pictures and papers and poems in my mind. Run and run in my mind. I know more, no more. And one word crawls and looks, papa. Blindfold and number. No air, no light. Interrogate and break. No air, no light. Slap and suffocate. No air, no light. Electrocute and rape. No air, no light. Chain and castrate. No air, no light. Shoot and sedate. No air, no light. Kill and negate. No air, no light. What happened to the fathers who were disappeared? What happened to the children? What happened to the mothers? Why don't the men speak of these things? Tell me, survivor, how does it feel to survive? How many endings can I imagine for the poets, the high school student, the babies that are all disappeared? Why bring back the past? Why name these things? Why do you want to know? I have a puzzle missing one piece. I have a piece to a puzzle I can't fix, Papa. And I think I'm gonna take it to the United States when we are here, refugees in exile. Geometry. Before my mother runs away with my father's housemate on a Greyhound, leaving me behind, this time voluntarily, but to her credit, temporarily. She will host parties where wine will agree to forever follow solitude in this and that one's vessel, where blue bell-bottoms will hustle and for old times twist, and I will ignore the dancers and stand on a chair before a night-fevered window, drawing slow, unstable circles. Take it to D.C. I grew up in Washington, D.C., and in a neighborhood called Mount Pleasant. Nobody from D.C.? Nobody? Okay. So it was like the murder capital of the nation at that time. And so we had these like strategies for survival, which were crazy. There was also a huge crack epidemic, and so it was pretty intense. After school, I scurry to some safe part of wall when floodlights come, and they come like a man certain small things in his house eat his private bread. I am the floodlights cockroach. I can die on contact. I scurry off the bus, down the street, up the stairs after 3, and into the tub made of steel, safer than windows for scrawling basic math. 1 day plus 1 day plus 1. So we were instructed to, after school, if there were shootouts, to hide in our bathtubs, because the bullets could go through windows but not through steel tubs. And so that was actually one of the strategies for doing your homework in tubs if you were in a situation. El bus 42. Mornings from September to June. Okay, so this is like the bus I used to take to school. So that's el bus 42. Mornings from September to June, we walked like badass bulldozers to the back of the bus. Far from our mothers, the word was did it or fucked. The word was bitch, ho, my man bought me that thing you want. Word, who kept count of the homemade things that left our wombs sucked dry or dead? We didn't know we were fragile on our way from one war to the next. And I'm gonna take it to Activism College, freshman year. What? And this is like friendships. Friendships, compañeras. What? You are right. I've never been lonely like you. Never been alone in a kitchen with 7 brothers, 3 sisters, 2 mothers, a daughter, a husband, and his 2 friends. A pot of black beans, a pot of hominy, a pot of tamales, a hot comal and 60 tortillas, 2 chairs, a big table, and a hologram of Jesus above the door. The one that if you look at him from one angle, he is an intact white man. But if you make a move, his mouth drops, eyes roll back, and blood gushes from his head. And the small plastic statue of the Virgen de Guadalupe, plugged in and flashing on-off on the kitchen counter next to the food processor, and the molcajete. And when you cry, everyone believes it's the onion. amigas, forever. Well, these crows are hard to get out of my house, and you, girl, are the worst. Where'd you get your hunger to watch me so? Look how your claws take hold of my crown, how your talons curl inside my skull. Look how your beak rips out my hair, pick, peck, pick, peck. Look how you swallow my brain, so brain, listen how you call. Why you go, why you go, why you go away? Look how you hold fast in me, pick, peck, possessive bird. Oh my, the beauty of your wings and of the old, but the weight and the weight of being owned. And I am going to keep track of time. How we doing? No? Yes? You're doing good. Okay. So let me just skip. So just maybe one, two. All right, distance. This is from this book. That was all from The Strange House. Testifies the distance. My grandfather asked me, could I remember him, the park, the birds, the bread? I'll be dying soon, he said. His voice would stretch the ocean and end there inside the olive phone in our tiny kitchen. My mother would stretch the green shell to my ear. Speak! Say something! Speak! My fingers tugged the cord across our red wooden table. Listening to the dark adios, I carved half moons into the wood with my fingernails. In case I am dead by your next birthday, mija, remember, we ate without him, without any elders, and the world was fine. We have yet to bury our bones in this foreign land. When we do, where will we come from then? Already home is a carnation pinned to our cold breasts. So I think I'm gonna I feel like we should do time, conversation, and so I want to just end with tatuajes. So you mentioned tatuaje, and tattoo, the tatuaje. So I'm gonna read it. Tatuaje. A spirit came down and whispered in our drunk ears, mark your wombs with wild roses. And between beers, I dreamed that we were soldiers missing our mothers, which explains why we are 17 and in a tattoo parlor that smells of ships and motorcycles, of leather and ocean, of marijuana and sad men's blood. We each ask for a single rose with a ribbon around the stem, for a word, some power. We want to be fire. The artist changes channels. We watch Looney Tunes as his needles start. When we stop at the liquor store, our roses, orange and violet, bleeding through the bandages, I want to tell you that if we ever find ourselves blindfolded in a war or in an apple metaphor accused of ruining it for everybody with hunger or knowledge, I would not insist on how sacred is the light, how sacred is the tree or the light, or how sacred is what moves us. I'd become a storyteller, and out of our inevitable estrangement, I'd make us up again and again. And can I finish with Joy Harjo? All right, and then so I'll finish with anybody here read Joy Harjo? Oh man, June Jordan and Joy Harjo. You got to read them. So Joy Harjo, Eagle Poem, by Joy Harjo. To pray you open your whole self, to sky, to earth, to sun, to moon, to one whole voice that is you, and know there is more that you can't see, can't hear, can't know except in moments steadily growing and in languages that aren't always sound, but other circles of motion. Like eagle that Sunday morning over Salt River, circled in blue sky in wind, swept our hearts clean with sacred wings. We see you, see ourselves, and know that we must take the utmost care and kindness in all things. Breathe in, knowing we are made of all this, and breathe, knowing we are truly blessed because we were born, and die soon with a true circle of motion. Like eagle rounding out the morning inside us, we pray that it will be done in beauty, in beauty. I love her. Thank you. Thank you.